extreme pleasure to welcome this wonderful audience to today's event. I'd like to extend my hearty welcome to our respected principal, Dr. Jijimonke Thomas, and our Vice Principal, Dr. Cherian John, who due to some emergencies are not currently present here. So let's start the event. The Union Minister for Finance and Corporate Affairs, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, presented the Union Budget on the 1st of February. While announcing the Union Budget, she said that this budget will lay the blueprint of the Indian economy over the Amrit Kaal of the next 25 years, from India at 75 to India at 100. And to know the highlights, benefits, drawbacks, and to get an overview and analysis of the budget is the sole purpose of this webinar. The schedule brushes upon a spectrum of themes that discusses the aspect of the Union Budget 2022. I'm profusely elated to take the opportunity to welcome Dr. Lekha S Chakraborty, Professor and Chair at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi. She's also the Research Associate at the Levy Economic Institute of Bard College, New York. On the behalf of Ivanios College and Department of Economics, I thank you, ma'am, for providing your gracious presence to join us this evening. Before starting the program, I'd like to get the attention of all participants of the webinar. Please note and be sure that your mic is on mute and do not press the present the screen option. I'm repeating again, please be careful that your mic is on mute and you're not pressing the screen option. And if anyone has any query, concern or question, we have a Q&A session towards the end of the meeting, so you can post your question in the chat box or speak to me directly after the session. So without further ado, let's get started. Faith is a bird that feels light when the dawn is still dark, and prayer is an expansion of faith within and around us. I'd like to welcome Alexis Das of 30C Economics for the prayer song.
കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ?
കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ട്, Alex.
കാണായ ലോകങ്ങൾ കാക്കുന്ന ദേവാ, കാരുണ്യ സിന്ധോ നമിക്കുന്നു ഞങ്ങൾ. കരളിന്റെ പൂക്കൾ നിൻ പാദതാരിൽ കാണിക്ക വെച്ചു നമിക്കുന്നു ഞങ്ങൾ. വിറയാർന്ന കൈകൾ ചലിക്കുന്ന നേരം നീറുന്ന കരളിന്റെ കൈക്കുമ്പിളിൽ നീ ചൊരിയുക നാഥ നിൻ സ്നേഹധാര. നേരിന്റെ പാത തെളിക്കണേ ദേവാ. ലോകാ സമസ്ത സുഖിനോ ഭവന്തു. ഈ മന്ത്രമീ ലോകമെങ്ങും മുഴങ്ങാൻ വിജ്ഞാനദീപം നിറകതിർച്ചൂടാൻ കാരുണ്യ സിന്ധു നമിക്കുന്നു ഞങ്ങൾ. കാണായ ലോകങ്ങൾ കാക്കുന്ന ദേവാ, കാരുണ്യ സിന്ധോ നമിക്കുന്നു ഞങ്ങൾ.
Thank you, Alex. May I now request our most loved and respected head of the department, Ms. Liji D, to deliver the welcome address.
A warm good evening to one and all. Respected Chief Guest, Dr. Lekha S Chakraborty, respected Vice Principal, Dr. Shirley Stewart, respected Dean, Reverend Dr. Gigi Thomas Father, dear colleagues and my dear students. Today I am so glad to be here to organize such an event and invited talk on the Union Budget 2022-23. As we know, the budget was presented before Lok Sabha on February 1st, 2022 by the Honorable Union Finance Minister, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman. It was a much awaited budget amidst COVID-19 pandemic and the associated disruptions in the economy. Through this budget, the government is mainly focusing to build up capacity to bring about long-term prosperity to the economy. Being focused on the long-term programs and policies, would it be capable to bring a sudden revival in the economy from the existing recessionary situations in terms of employment, unemployment, poverty, inequality, etc.? To make a detailed analysis of the Union Budget 2022-23, we have with us the renowned economist and well-known personality, Dr. Lekha S Chakraborty, Professor, Chair, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi, Research Associate, the Levy Institute of Economics, Bard College, New York. The most proudful thing is that she is an alumna of the Department of Economics. She had studied in our college during the period 1993. When I contacted her to invite to this program, it was with great pleasure that she agreed to spend her valuable time with us today. With great pride and privilege, I welcome Dr. Lekha S Chakraborty ma'am on behalf of the Department of Economics, Ivanios College, Trivandrum, to this webinar. We have with us our Vice Principal, respected Dr. Shirley Stewart, who is presiding over this meeting. Dr. Shirley ma'am has always been our inspiration to conduct all activities in the department. I extend my sincere welcome to you, ma'am. I cordially welcome the Dean of our college, Reverend Dr. Gigi Thomas Nather, who is a fortunate combination of academic excellence and spirituality. We are so grateful to have the guidance received from you, Father, for our department. I welcome my dear colleagues, Dr. Afilash Ramesh, Dr. Rakhi Chandrasekhar, Dr. Kirtan Rose, Dr. Beta John, who have been a great support for every activities of our department. Respected heads and faculties of other departments are also present here. I extend my hearty welcome to you all. Last but not the least, students, you are the gems of our department. From the moment of the discussion to organize this event, you have been rendering priceless support to us. I assure you that this would be a very useful talk to nurture your knowledge. The students of analytical economics and from other departments are also participating in this meeting. I extend my hearty welcome to all beloved students to this program. Once again, I welcome one and all who are participating in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I now request our Honorable Vice Principal, Dr. Shirley Stewart, to deliver the presidential address.
Respected Dr. Lekha Chakraborty, the Professor Chair of the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, it's a proud privilege to have you here because though I do not have the personal privilege of meeting you while as a student or as a teacher in Ivanios College, I'm so happy to know that you're an alumni of Ivanios College. Welcome to our college once again. Dear Liji, the head of the Department of Economics, and my other colleagues in the Department of Economics, all my other colleagues who are present here, Dr. Gigi Thomas, the Dean of our college, and my dear children, this is a wonderful opportunity that is presented before you to connect with the world around you, being proud of the fact that you are a citizen of India. While we know that, this is a budget that has been presented while India has just moved forward from the horrors of the second wave of the pandemic and also managing quite well with the fears of Omicron. We know that in the last 1 year, the citizens of India have been going through a distressful phase, leaving scars in our national psyche. I'm not an economic an expert to analyze the financial aspects of the budget, but I am a citizen of this country, proud to know or eager to know what the country, the political government of our country has to offer in order to heal the wounds that are there, that has affected our economy and our country. See, as was said here on February 1st, the fourth budget by Ms. Nirmala Sitaraman that was presented to us was one of her shortest budget speeches. And we understand, or I understand that, with the Indian economy projected to retain the tag of the fastest growing major economy despite the pandemic, the industry sort of draws comfort from the Union Budget of 22-23, which is prioritized, as Liji correctly said, a long-term growth by boosting consumption. And, I think there is a significantly increasing capital expenditure of 35.4% that is projected by the budget. But as an educationist, my concerns or my interests are with the allocation and the budget in the education sector. And this year we have a overall increase of about 11.86% in the allotment in the education sector, with one class, one TV channel, Prime Minister's e-Vidya program going to be implemented. We have a digital and university that was announced, which will provide access to students across this country with world-class quality university education. But there are also some contentious issues there where while talking about the digital divide, we don't know what has been allocated as far as elevation of the digital divide is concerned. We had huge talks of what shall I say, climate and green and futuristic economy, a futuristic technology-driven economy being given an impetus. We had talks of the strong ecosystem with a huge major portion of our budget being allocated for digitizing the economy. We have the expressways, cargo terminals, and multimodal. And we have a futuristic vision that is expected to take India into the the top of the world economy. So I'd say that overall the Union Budget 22-23 has stayed true to the long-term goal of complementing a macro growth along with focus on infrastructural digital economy, fintech, lab tech development, energy transition, climate action, etc. So let's hope that this will be the beginning of the Amrit Kal for the country that the budget has promised us. I'm sure that we are going to listen to wonderful analysis of the budget by dear Dr. Lekha Chakraborty. I bring you the wishes from the principal who couldn't be present here because of some personal issues. I wish the Department of Economics and my colleagues in the Department of Economics who has taken this wonderful initiative to bring the budget to our living rooms, to our fingertips. All the best, Department of English, and thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's now the time for the highlight event of this evening, to leap into the spectrum of thoughts. And before welcoming our esteemed speaker, I'd like to invite Madhavi from 30C Economics for a brief introduction.
Hello, audible? Okay. Good afternoon all, respected dignitaries, all the departments, faculty and students, all the invitees and my dear friends and well-wishers. I deem it as an honor and privilege of me to introduce on our today's special resource person, Honorable respected Dr. Lekha S Chakraborty, and welcome her to give the keynote address today in this webinar session. Dr. Lekha S Chakraborty is a professor, chair at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi, and an elected member of the Governing Board of Management, International Institute of Public Finance, Munich, the World Association of Public Finance Economists. She is a pioneering economist in institutionalizing gender budgeting in India, with Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India in 2004. She is also research affiliate at the Levy Economics Institute of Bard College, New York. Her areas of interest are macroeconomics of public finance, fiscal federalism, extractive sector economics, financing human development, and gender budgeting. Some of her recent current research are effectiveness of gender budgeting on gender equality outcomes and fiscal space, which is invited for American Economics Association's meetings Atlanta, January 2019. Macroeconometrics analysis determining private corporate investment in India, forthcoming in Handbook of Econometrics. Macroeconomic policy for extractive sector, tax buoyancy, analysis of state finances, and there are many more. She is the co-author of the book Social Sector in Decentralized Economy, India in the Era of Globalization, published by Cambridge University Press. And she is the author of Fiscal Consolidation, Budget Deficits, and Macroeconomy. This book has received endorsement reviews from Y.V. Reddy, former General of Reserve Bank of India, and also from Vito Tansi, former IMF Executive Director, Fiscal Affairs. And on a special note, both of these books is quite familiar to the third-year economics class students, as these both are one of our public economics suggested references. And she has worked for IMF, World Bank, the UNDP, the UN Women, and the Commonwealth Secretariat on short stints. Her work experience on macro fiscal policy and human development spans across 8 countries. And she is twice an awardee of Shastri into Canada program from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Government of Canada. She was visiting professor at American University, Uppsala University, Carleton University, and University of Utah. She has papers in national and international journals. She is a columnist in the Indian Express, Hindu, Financial Express, Business Line, DD News, Air World Air Service, Rajya Sabha, Hindustan Times and Scrolls, and she is also being featured in CNBC, ANI, and there are many more. And some of her recent publications include COVID-19 and Public Finance for Children, a case study of state of Odisha, India, mainstreaming climate change commitments through Finance Commission's recommendations, COVID-19 and Public Investment for Children, the case of Indian state of Karnataka, COVID-19 and gender budgeting, applying a gender lens to union budget in India. She also holds several membership in committees and commissions, such as some of the main I would like to mention. Member classification of budgetary transactions, Chairman, Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Government of India, 2004. 2020 board member, Governing Board of International Institute of Public Finance, Germany. Member economist for full employment, the Levy Economics Institute of Bard College. Member IWG, GEM Macroeconomics, University of Utah. And she is also a lead Asia Pacific research on gender budgeting for IMF and fiscal policy for gender equality, prepare the background paper expert group meeting for United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on women's economic empowerment. And on a special note, it's a proud and happy moment for us as students of Ivanios College, especially belonging to Department of Economics, as she's an alumni of our college from our department in 1990-1993 batch. So with all due respect and honor, I would like to welcome you, ma'am, for the keynote address, Union Budget 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
You're
Thank
audible.
you. Yeah. And it's my privilege and honor. And, I'm feeling it's home. After a long time, it's the first time I'm officially, coming to my college. Otherwise, I had taken classes for the BA students, last but 1 year. But this is my first formal and official address, and I feel so nostalgic, and I'm so grateful to principal for having me for this occasion to talk to students about the union budget. A special thanks to, of course, Dean, Reverend Dr. Gigi Thomas. And, I was listening to you, ma'am, Dr. Shirley Stewart, and, you have set the right tone to my talk. And it was heartening to listen to you when you spoke that I would love to know about this budget as a citizen of India, what is in store for us, and, for the warm coordination and organization. It's a wonderful organization skills by HOD Dr. Liji and her students, and Nanda Lakshmi and her friends. Of course, Ashina, Madhavi, and Alex, thank you so much for this, putting this warm tone for this occasion. And, when I talk about budget, as Shirley ma'am pointed out, we need to know we have healed the wounds of people, or we have just focused on economic growth and the $1 trillion economy is only our vision. That was very intelligent and humane way she put forward, her question before us. And let's unpack the budget from that perspective. When I look into this budget, of course, the narrative was that a huge capital investment, a huge public investment is important for the growth recovery process. But at the same time, we are braving a crisis. This is a dual crisis time, like health crisis, and it's mounting into a macroeconomic crisis. So we need public policy, both from the RBI and Ministry of Finance, to tackle the issues so that this health crisis will not mount into a prolonged macroeconomic crisis. So budget is a powerful tool to address what is a country's vision and what are the toolkits we use to arrest what is a humanitarian crisis and what are the things that are impediments for the growth recovery process. So here, you must have heard about Geeta Gopinath. She's an IMF, and she has written a paper, Cycle is Strength. Students can take a look into that. And also the fiscal monitors published by IMF. That's a wonderful document to understand the macroeconomic instabilities and the macroeconomic policy realm. That is very crucial as a backdrop to understand the fiscal arithmetic. So before getting into the fiscal arithmetic, let me tell you about that Cycle is Strength paper and about the macroeconomic uncertainty that is mounting globally. So in this paper, Cycle is Strength, she mentioned with her co-author Mark that in the context of emerging economies, the analytical framework of business cycles, I know that you have learned about business cycle in your class, that kind of a framework may not exist in the sense, there will not be clear ups and downs in the sense, if the economy is going down, if there is a drop in GDP, there will be a wonderful upturn that happens automatically. That's called the business cycles. You date the cycle, the dating in the sense, the upturns and the downturns you date. But that analytical framework is not helping us to frame policies, especially in the context of emerging economies, in the sense, the ups and downs that cannot be automatic. That drop in the GDP we experience may be a permanent scar. If that is a permanent scar, if that is not just a deviation from the prior pandemic or the prior crisis levels of GDP, then focusing the public policy, especially the budgetary policy and the RBI, central government monetary policy, just on correcting the cyclicality and visualizing that our economy will bounce back to the pre-pandemic convergence to the GDP or pre-crisis, convergence of that prior GDP level, that vision can be flawed. That's why, we need to look into the hysteresis. Hysteresis means dependence on the economy, on history. So those analytical framework is very crucial to understand the growth upturn or the rebounding, the growth process to the pre-pandemic or the pre-crisis level. That is very crucial. So this is the punch number one, that analytical framework need to be correct. Otherwise, if we use this budget as a counter-cyclical policy tool, counter-cyclical in the sense, when the economy goes down, we pump prime, we put a lot of money into the economy. Then when the economy, that upturn happens, then little bit of, role of government is shortened and a withdrawal of role of government in terms of curtailing the spending. That is counter-cyclical fiscal policy. But the counter-cyclical fiscal policy may not work, in the time of pandemic, unless we look into the structural bottlenecks of the economy. So that is why this package, as Shirley ma'am rightly pointed out, to tackle this, a sort of mini series of budgetary announcements that has happened since March 2020. And if you look into that, it's a simultaneous, 5-facting methods we adopted, as well as you use this crisis as an opportunity to float certain structural reforms. So it's an instantaneous package to correct the cyclicality, and also you put emphasis for the long-term structural reforms in the labor market, in the power sector, in farm sector, in the business. We have floated a kind of long-term structural reforms. So that's the background. Now, from this analytical framework, as when a teacher talks to you, her vision is to take you from the analytical frameworks, from the theoretical frameworks, to get into the data and the empirics. And from this inferences you draw, then you come up with the public policy prescriptions. That's the way a teacher takes you or makes you ready to contribute to our country, So in that process, in that journey, I'm trying to tell you what is a theoretical framework. Now I am getting into a little bit of an empirical data and the evidence that's happening globally. So let's look at the numbers. Globally, what's happening? US Federal Reserve, the central bank of US, there's a fear that they are going to raise the interest rate. So what will happen if US Federal Reserve, their central bank, raise the interest rates? A component of our foreign capital or our foreign exchange reserve, that's very hot. It's a hot money. And hot money, by definition, respond to interest rate differentials. So where the interest rate is high, the capital will be flighty to that country. So RBI, by mandate, they have to look into the inflation containment by pegging this interest rates. So that's the way, inflation targeting, that's a new monetary policy framework in India. It's an agreement signed between RBI and the government of India that the single most criteria or the single most objective of RBI is looking into the inflation containment. At the same time, when you have global pressures, you just visualize a moment that you are the RBI governor, then I'm telling you what are the crises around, then what will be your decision if you are the governor of our central bank. The crisis is this. If you don't raise the interest rate, your capital will be flighty and the inflation containment will not be complete. But the moment you increase the interest rate, then the cost of borrowing of government can go up. If that is the case, then that affects the planning we have for the fiscal policy front. And if the interest rate is increased, then that can affect your investment process, because you have to keep your interest rate lower, because lower the interest, greater the investment. And the investment is crucial for the growth recovery process. So as RBI governor, what will be your take? You will keep the interest rate status quo at a low level, which has happened in the Monetary Policy Committee announcement on February 9th. They kept the interest rate status quo at 4%, visualizing that growth first. Growth recovery process is very important, so that we need to keep the interest rate low. That's what is happening. But at the same time, the moment US Fed Reserve increase the interest rate, then there can be problems related to our foreign capital front, and the capital can be flighty. So this is the policy uncertainty. And to add to that, we have taper tantrums. And what exactly is a taper tantrum? After the global financial crisis, a lot of liquidity has been induced into the economy globally. And now, Central Bank of US is deciding that they will decrease their balance sheet, of the central bank, by absorbing that liquidity. And in the process, it's inevitable that the interest rate of US Fed can go up. So then, on the top of that, we have energy price volatility, oil price volatility, then a lot of volatilities in the components of the food and fuel. So when inflation is mounting, if you look into the data, the WPI inflation, that's crossing 14%. And the CPI, the consumer price index, is reaching 6%. And what is that mandate given to us? officially up to what level inflation is allowed in our country. We have, as I mentioned earlier, an inflation targeting framework. And as per that inflation targeting framework, officially, we announced that up to 4%, it's okay. Then plus or minus 2, that means up to 6%, we are a bit comfortable, but beyond 6, it's uncomfortable. So that's based on a rules-based monetary policy. So given this macroeconomic uncertainty and the macroeconomic framework and its constraints from the monetary policy front, there is a huge responsibility for the North Bloc, the Ministry of Finance, to do the heavy lifting, because RBI has done heavy lifting to take the economy out of the issues related to the pandemic by announcing huge liquidity infusion programs into the economy. And you must be remembering, there are various announcements that has happened from the monetary policy front. It is not only the rates, the interest rates were kept at 4%. More than that, the announcement related to the liquidity infusion, they have used a technique called Operation Twist. What exactly is Operation Twist? In the bond market, you have short-term bonds and the long-term bonds. So RBI simultaneously sold the short-term bonds and bought the long-term bonds. You know why it has happened? Because they want to keep the maturity structure of the bond market towards long-term so that there will not be any refinancing risk in the short-term, and there will be space for them to get into the growth recovery process. So that's one thing. Then they have infused a lot of liquidity into the system by focusing on stressed sectors. But of course, we need to do a lot regarding the contact intensive sectors. But the story is that liquidity infusion or the credit infusion was the predominant narrative of our policy making to take the economy out of the pandemic state of affairs. But you can take a look into the work by Stiglitz, the Nobel laureate Stiglitz, and in that work, which economic stimulus works. In that paper, Stiglitz clearly mentioned that the multipliers coming out of the credit-infused kind of narrative of the economic stimulus packages have limited impact. That means you are ready to give credit. But at the same time, as Shirley Ma'am as well mentioned, if you have to take the economy back to the prior pandemic or the prior crisis regime, you need to focus on the demand side as well. But in this budget or in the monetary policy announcements, are we focusing just on the supply side? Credit, that is a supply side economics. So we need to focus more on the demand. The humanitarian crisis can be tackled only if you focus on the demand side as well. Now, given this backdrop, the prime announcement of this budget was, as I mentioned earlier, the focus on public investment in infrastructure. And theoretically, I know that you must have heard from, Liji ma'am, that there is a process or the phenomenon called crowding in. Like, $1 of investment you put into the economy from the public sector, that crowds in. It's like a $1 crowds in, but there is a counter logic to it that if you increase the fiscal deficit so much, that can crowd out private investment also. I will tell you why. The loanable funds in the economy is limited. So you are preempting that loanable funds to finance the deficit. So what is available for the private corporate sector is limited, and that can rise the interest rate. So this is the process of crowding out. But from the position of strength, Finance Minister has announced that in the context of an emerging country like India, rise in fiscal deficit will not crowd out private investment. Rather, we are substantiating the high fiscal deficits by connecting it to high investment, high public investment in capital infrastructure, which crowds in, private investment. So that's the kind of narrative she has given, and this boosts investors' confidence. Even if we have the macroeconomic fundamentals, if you look at my deficit is so high, but don't worry, we are using that high fiscal deficit to finance public investment in infrastructure, which crowds in private investment. So that's a narrative. And high fiscal deficit and high debt, that is not taken as a good feature for a sound fiscal discipline, you understand. But I always argued, and Ashina and Madhavi mentioned about my book on fiscal deficit, and macroeconomic activity, the fiscal consolidation. And this is, it's prior to the pandemic, I have written this book. But in that book, the narrative which I floated ahead was deficit is good. A timely deficit is good. And you can understand the empirical evidence now from this budget, because in this budget, if our motive is to, contain the fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP, that's the norm as per the fiscal rules, as per the fiscal responsibility and management in our country. But you can understand that the moment we try to control the fiscal deficit to 3%, that will happen through expenditure compression if our revenues are not buoyant. In the time of crisis, in the time of pandemic, when revenues are uncertain, if you go ahead with a tight fiscal consolidation, keeping fiscal deficit to GDP ratio at 3%, that can lead to expenditure compression. And expenditure compression in turn will affect the growth recovery process. That's why from the position of strength, Finance Minister announced that, don't fear deficit. That was a narrative she floated. Don't fear deficit in the time of pandemic. And her fiscal deficit was even more than 9% last year. If you look at the revised estimates, it was 9.2. But in this year, she pegged it at 6.8% of GDP. But slight fiscal slippage, you can note the moment you get into the budget at a glance. That document is there in the website of Ministry of Finance. You can take a look into that table, that a slight fiscal slippage. She pegged it at 6.8, but it has gone to 6.9. And in this year, her number is 6.4. That's what she pegged, but not 3%. But the long-term fiscal consolidation is on board, because we are aware that we should go ahead with an excessive deficit procedure. The deficits are beyond certain threshold limit. We need to bring it back to not 3%, but what she announced was 4.5% by 2025-26. So we have the fiscal space now, because if you tighten it to 3%, fiscal space will not be there. And if there is no fiscal space, how do you prioritize your expenditure, which is relevant for the growth recovery process? So that's the relevance of the fiscal consolidation. And, when you look into the budget, you have to see that what is an underlying, that statement and the narrative behind the fiscal deficit number, because it's a little high. And you should feel comfortable with that, because as Shirley ma'am also mentioned, that we are emphasizing on public infrastructure for the growth recovery process. And, that numbers also she mentioned, but I can repeat that. We have, 7.5 trillion rupees. That is what is the, center's own Capex that we, anticipate in the forthcoming year. And this is obviously 2 trillion higher than 2021-22 revised estimates. And it's more than double when you compare this with 2019-20 figures of just 3.36 trillion. Trillion is lakh crore, okay? Because when I talk to the international audience, they don't understand lakh and crores, which we use in our, our country. So we need to convert into billion and trillions for them. So I always remember this 1 lakh crore is 1 trillion. So, we need to communicate to wider audience sometimes regarding the fiscal policies. So this initiative of increasing the Capex, that is welcome. But at the same time, if you look into the expenditure budget in detail, expenditure budget has 2 components. One is capital. Of course, we are comfortable because the announcement is quite cool. The other component is revenue expenditure. Revenue expenditure is, what exactly is happening in education, health, food security, social protection, your employment. Because, when everything else fails, government will act as an employer of last resort, providing jobs to the people. That guarantee is very important. But when I look into these numbers, there's a matter of concern. Revenue expenditure is bad. If that is a narrative, that can lead to humanitarian crisis, because revenue expenditure relates to all these items I mentioned, including the social infrastructure like health and education. So where whether our narrative of focusing just on the public infrastructure, that is a physical infrastructure, that's partial. Do we need to give emphasis to social infrastructure? That's the health and education. But when we look into the budget, Dr. Shirley ma'am has already mentioned that we have announced a lot of programs related to the supply side again. Like, we have set up 200 TV stations and we have digital universities. Of course, the technology-related announcements of the spectrum of 5G as a part of PLI, artificial intelligence, all these are welcome. But at the same time, the students can understand, from your experience that how many students, are able to access the system and the internet network for their studies. So there is a learning loss that is happening. So what is it in the budget to support those kind of policies in which the digital divide is tackled for the students? We haven't heard anything, but my hunch is outside the purview of budget, there will be a huge announcement related to how to tackle the digital divide. Because, the students, if you look at the estimates that's coming up from the National Sample Survey, the digital divide and the access of children to the education, and if you look at the enrollment rate, we call it as effective enrollment rate now, because it is effective in the sense adjusting for the access of children to the systems and the internet networks. So then, what we are seeing is a very pathetic scenario that the enrollment rates are coming down and there is learning loss. And students have braved this pandemic by adjusting to new ways of learning. And there are a lot of mental health issues and all, but the support of the teachers and students, that's exactly what I thought the moment I heard, from Nandalakshmi and Liji ma'am, the way they have conducted this program, this organized program, then I understood that nothing has changed over the years. The tradition of Ivanios, of students and teachers, on board together to do everything. So that mental health, that support of mental health, that is very crucial for, learning outcomes. So those kind of policy, perspectives, that is quite absent when we look into this budget from, demand side. Because a student enrollment ratio may come down, not just because of the supply side constraints. It can come down due to a lot of demand side constraints. Why a girl child is not in school? You need to look into the demand side. So using that public financial management tool, what are the kind of initiatives to tackle that learning loss in the education sector? That's a matter of concern. So maybe we can think that outside the budget perspectives, there may be some announcements related to learning loss, along with, malnutrition. That's an urgent concern. It's a silent emergency. If you look into the anthropometric data of stunting, wasting, underweight, then you can understand that malnutrition is increasing, and that's we need to look into the nutrition related public expenditure reviews. So that's very crucial. And in the time of pandemic, of course, the narrative of capital expenditure is welcome, but the multiplier effects is long term. The short term, the policy components related to food security, social protection measures, social infrastructure, as I mentioned, these are very important. Otherwise, if we put the perspective of economic growth, that's everything. That economic growth paradigm will naturally get translated into better human development. And we need not focus much on financing human development aspects in the budget. Then I think we will not get the story correct. And I do believe that there will be an announcement related to all these aspects, quite a strong thing, because otherwise in this budget, revenue spending of important components, we could see there is a drastic cut related to that. And that's a matter of concern. When we celebrate the economy, that economic growth paradigm, focusing on the public infrastructure investment, we also need to acknowledge what are our policies, and concerns regarding the mounting humanitarian crisis. So that's very important. Now, let's get into cooperative federalism, because of course it's a union budget, but it gives some sort of narratives regarding the center-state relations. as students of Kerala, we wonder what's there for our state in the union budget. But such announcements didn't happen this time. And that political economy, budget can act as a tool to incentivize voters. That calculus of consent, voters' consent, that can be incentivized through the budgetary announcements. But to woo the voters to that political economy of the budget, if I look at, I'm so happy that there is no populist measures announced to woo the budgets, to woo the voters, as it's a prelude to the many important state elections. So that political economy, when I look at, nothing state-specific, no announcements are there. And, maybe that one announcement relate to, 9,000 rupees giving to the rural farmers that can, help the rural, getting the rural voters on board. But at the same time, if you look into the farming sector, that sector is in crisis. Over the years, gross capital formation in the agriculture sector has come down. And when we talk about infrastructure, we need to look into this sector, what's happening to the agriculture sector and the gross capital formation in the agriculture sector. Now, through what? Supporting income to farmers, that income transfers, or supporting the price mechanism. There are two announcements, One is related to income transfers to the farmers. The other is helping the farmers by using the minimum support price. So this is a matter of debate in Lutyens, Delhi. I can hear that economists are divided regarding the income support is better or distorting the prices in the market, that is better. So in this debate, that is inconclusive debate, we need to wait and see what is the clarity in the policy proposition towards the agriculture sector, and doubling the farmers' income in 5 years. That was a narrative in 2014. And we are still grappling with that, because to happen, that sector has to grow at 14% of GDP. So then, gross capital formation in the sector is quite relevant. That's important prelude to doubling the farmers' income. So these are areas of major concern. That's why I mentioned that if you just focus on the cyclicality issues, then you will not get the full picture. The structural bottlenecks and the structural reforms are very important, and agriculture is an important sector. Now, in the cooperative federalism, two major announcements has happened in this budget. Of course, that states are not given any specific announcements or the political economy, because budget is not only a technical exercise. It's not only just annual financial statement. There is a politics to all budgets, right? It's a political statement as well. That's why, as students, we have to look into the technical aspects of the budget as well as the political economy of the budget. And of course, there is not even a single announcement this year to trigger the political economy perspectives by, incentivizing the calculus of voting mandate or the consent of the voters. That has not happened. But if you look at, there is an announcement related to the transfer of, funds, interest-free loans to the states to initiate capital infrastructure investment. Because if you look at the data, states are doing the heavy lifting in terms of capital infrastructure. It's not the center. So center transferred 1 lakh crore or something related to that to the states, that is interest-free loans, to get into, it's a friend loading. You do it right now, your capital investment. So that initiative is welcome. Then second initiative is, I mentioned about fiscal consolidation. That's the meaning is to keep the fiscal deficit to GDP at 3%. What happened to states? Do they have any norms to follow, fiscal rules to follow? They do have. They do. That's also another 3%. Right now, it is increased to 4% of GDP, the fiscal deficit of the states. So that gives them a little bit fiscal space. But at the same time, this 4%, within this 4%, 0.5% of the deficit to GDP, that is related to the reforms in the power sector. Otherwise, that extra borrowing space they cannot avail. So will the states be on board by doing the power sector reforms in their states? That's another question. Power sector is an interesting story. India has got electricity generation to tackle, that 100% electrification of villages. But at the same time, distribution companies, power distribution companies are loss making. We need to support them in order to tackle that 100% electrification of our villages and many other things related to the power sector. But at the same time, state governments guaranteeing the distribution companies that we will support, we will guarantee to clear your mess regarding this, loss. That is the way. There was a narrative by floating non-SLR bonds, by supporting, the power discom companies. But at the same time, if you look into the financial efficiency parameters of the power sector and the operation efficiency of the parameters of the power sector, that's a mixed picture. Many of the states aggregate technical and commercial loss in the sector is huge. And tariff revisions, that is again a political economic question, because politicians will not engage in tariff revisions. Then if you look at their budgets, the aggregate cost and the aggregate revenue, that is quite huge. So discom companies we need to support, but it's a moral hazard question that how long we can support by taxpayers' money by recapitalizing the sector which is in loss. There are several questions, but we need to look into what is a cooperative federalism and the cooperative, that dynamics, because, there's a beautiful thing that's happening in India. That is that, like, if you ask me the question, what holds our country together? That is institutions, right? Institutions holds our country together. And we do believe in democracy, that, democracy and the voting mandate and the institutions related to that, over the years, we never realized, but when you compare it to autocratic regimes or the autocratic countries, then we understand that importance of democracy, the beauty of institutions that holds our country together. Because the moment you look into the European Union, they come together as a project, based on economic integration. But at the same time, there are a lot of issues related to the cultural fissures and all happening now. And there's a paper I read recently in the Brookings papers that European Union as a project, that may be a failure. It's not a long-term sustainable project. So that's the way, fissures are coming up from the Europe front when, their monetary policy is exogenous and the fiscal policy is tightened, that they cannot use more than 3% of your deficit for any purpose. And that led to fiscal austerity measures. This is a matter of concern. And what's a lesson we learn from Europe? If you get into the fiscal austerity measures by compressing the expenditure, the public expenditure, that can lead to mounting humanitarian crisis. So fiscal austerity, that kills the economy, But if you look at the numbers, fiscal discipline is there. Your fiscal deficit is just 3% of GDP. But right now, from the position of strength, Finance Minister has announced a high GDP, and this narrative is very close to the public finance narrative of our state, Kerala also, that we keep high deficit, high debt, and it is used for, capital spending, capital infrastructure building. And at the same time, I can understand that there is a political economy narrative, like, it leads to the intergenerational inequity that the future generations are you putting into huge debt burden by doing this. No, there is an intergenerational equity in the sense you are doing it right now regarding the capital infrastructure investment. What is required for the human development, you are doing it right now. And for that, you may keep your deficit or debt quite high. So if you can substantiate your high debt and high deficit from the perspective of using it for human capital formation and for public infrastructure investment, that narrative is welcome. And that exactly is the budget if you look into in between lines of this budget announcement. So let me stop here. Okay, one more point about the greening of policies, that Shirley ma'am also mentioned in the beginning, and, that process of incorporating climate change commitments in the budget. This debate is very new to India, that, climate change is real. What's that you are doing in North Block, in the state government's Department of Finance, and the central bank, or RBI, to tackle the climate change commitments? And it's a huge debate. And Raghuram Rajan mentioned that if RBI, if central bank gets into the climate change commitments, that can go little political, and it can lead to reputation risk. And he was arguing that you cannot distinguish between green bond investment and brown bond investment. Tackling price stability and tackling financial stability, that's the prime objective of a center bank. If a center bank gets into climate change related risk and uncertainties, that can go little political. So let fiscal policy, let budgetary policies, do that heavy lifting regarding to greening of policies or the climate change commitments. Are you comfortable with this argument? Because if the financial stability is your concern, climate risk and climate uncertainties also can affect that financial stability process. So what is that stress test, green stress test done by the top investors and the banks to understand the climate related risk and investment you have the moment you announce your investment? So this is interlinked. So my take is, many economists, including European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, she was the former managing director of IMF, even ECB, Bank of England, they are coming up with policies of greening the monetary policy, that you need to focus on the climate change related risk and uncertainties, because this in turn affects the financial stability. So though your prime mandate is price stability or financial stability, you need to look into this. And I think RBI is in a mood to get into the stress test, the green stress test. And this is the first budget ever focused so much on climate change commitments. And we thought that there will be a public financial tool announcement in the budget regarding the climate change, climate responsive budgeting. And you put forward a statement how much our country is committed and spending on climate change commitments. But such statement, I think it is evolving. It will be on board very soon. But right now, what they announced is green bond. You have in the financing pattern of deficit, I mentioned about the levels of deficit, but there is a financing pattern of deficit also you need to look into. How we finance our deficit in our country, it's mainly through the bond financing, So within that framework, there's an earmarking to the green bonds within our major market borrowing programs. And that's another important area which we need to look into, because our climate change commitments, we cannot keep it untouched. And, many innovations related announcements happened. And, we were quite taken aback when, minister announced about the digital currency. Of course, there is a difference between the cryptocurrency and the government, central bank supported digital currency. One is asset, the other is currency. That's, digitizing the legal tender. That is legitimate when you talk about the central bank digital currency. But at the same time, crypto, we were trading in crypto, because if you look at globally, Indians, are the ones who are trading a huge in crypto assets. And she announced a tax for the crypto assets. But the question here is, unless you put forward a framework, a regulatory framework to maneuver this, you announced a tax. How can it be? So that's a question, raised when a minister was there in the press meeting, after the budget was announced, in that press conference after the budget. I don't have any specific details about, crypto assets, but when I listened to this press conference, what I understood, what minister's point was that it doesn't make it legitimate. Taxing an asset doesn't make it legitimate. But she cannot wait for the regulatory framework on board when some transaction is happening, and that's quite huge. But there is a quite of clarity issue over there, and I am listening to various tax officials, and there are a lot of ambiguity. I can understand that, but I'm keeping my mind open towards this innovation that is happening in the field of money and finance. Because over the years, there is an evolution happened. And in the money and finance class, you have learned the way money evolved over time, from that kit of gold coins, you go and trade cross-border to get the things you want. From that kit of gold coins, the money evolved, currency, coins. So I do believe that I do keep a mind open towards this concept of Digital currency, that's welcome. Digitizing the legal tender, that's welcome. But the concerns are related to the regulatory framework. And you can take a look into one wonderful article by Barry Aiken-Green. He talks about the digital dollar. So there, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in US, Treasury Secretaries like our finance minister, she mentioned that she is quite, positive about the digital currency in the sense when a country is highly unbanked, in order to make the transactions smooth, this digital currency can help in her financial inclusion process. So I was taken aback when I heard about this positivity of the digital currency, and you can understand that it reduces transactions cost. Because you need not go into the bank to bank. It's also a real-time transactions, like you don't have any time cost, you don't have any transactions cost, and it's quite okay provided the digital divide is tackled in our economy. Because how many people have access to the digital world, digital infrastructure? Once we tackle that, this can help in smoothening the transactions. It can smoothen the financial inclusion process. But otherwise, if the digital divide is mounting and the access of people to digital infrastructure is not there, then, the central bank digital currency and all, it's for whom? That's why, throughout these policy announcements, what has happened is there is an uneven recovery. India is growing. It's promising, but promising for whom? So that uneven recovery we need to see when we tackle about the economic recovery process. Because if the economic recovery is uneven, and if you're leaving behind a group of vulnerable people and you're focusing only on the top 1% of your income quintile, then that story is not correct. So that's a real concern, and we need to focus outside the purview of budget based on the narrative of leave nobody behind. That should be the powerful public policy, but we need to see what are the things which needed to be there to strengthen that perspective of leave nobody behind, going ahead from economic growth recovery as a paradigm. Of course, economic growth is important, but that doesn't naturally ensure human development. So that's another area in which we need to give emphasis. Thank you. Over to you, Ashiana.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the most informative and interesting session. It's been a great honor to be present this evening listening to you. And I'm sure that it has cleared up all sorts of doubts and confusion among our audience, and also has a lot of new ideas and visuals among them. And in case, dear friends, if you have any more, next coming up is a Q&A session. So if you want to ask them any questions, you can ask them directly, or you can post your question in the chat box, which I'll be reading out. So please go ahead and clear your doubts.
Yes, I can see a question from Ashish. Yeah. Ashish is asking me about India's gender budget. One moment. India's gender budget has been said as same for many years. And now in union budget, women has lesser to expect. What is your view on this? And what do you think is necessary in this budgeting, especially when women face shadow pandemic and an unpaid care work during the COVID-19 is keeping them out of contributing and participating in the economy? Thank you so much, Ashish, for asking me this question. Gender budgeting is a powerful public financial management tool. And, when economic stimulus packages are short-run in nature, gender budgeting, that framework we need to use, to take out the issues related to, this ill effects or the side effects of this growth recovery process by focusing just on GDP recovery. So in that sense, gender budgeting and your emphasis on care economy, that is very crucial. Because, as you mentioned, care economy infrastructure or care economy is quite invisible. statistically invisible, like, mother, sister, your friends. They are all contributing the care economy, of course, along with men and boys. But the moment you look into the time use survey data, you can understand that there is a disproportionate burden of the care economy that falls on women and girls. And that's one of the areas of concern. Why girls are not in school? Because of the care economy burden, because they have to take care of their younger siblings. They have to ensure clean fuel and clean water to the home. And there are a lot of burden that girl child has to go through, but she wants to live authentic. So what is that state machinery support you can give to the girl child so that she can tackle all these things? It can ease her burden and be in school and study well. So these demand sides, gender budgeting is a beautiful framework to look into, all these aspects. This is just one example. And another example, as Ashish pointed out, regarding the shadow pandemic. Of course, that mental health issues are very important. Shadow pandemic, by that term, what Ashish meant is, in the time of pandemic, studies have shown that, this violence against women, especially from the intimate partners, that was on the rise. So if the state machinery is supporting women, violence against women can be reduced. There is a study by University of California, and you can take a look into that, in which gender budgeting and its impact on the violence against women. It's a time series across states. So we call it as a panel data analysis across time, over time, across states. So in that study, the conclusion is that gender budgeting and this violence against women, that's inversely related. Inversely related in the sense, the higher your allocation or higher your emphasis on gender budgeting, lower will be the crime against women. And that is quite plausible. Gender budgeting is a social justice tool as well, along with, it is a tool of accountability and fiscal transparency. So that promising framework of gender budgeting needs to be given emphasis in the time of pandemic, so that, many issues which I mentioned related to, financing human development can be tackled. Otherwise, if the budgetary policy is based on the norm that equal opportunity, then it cannot, do wonders. In the sense, schools, colleges, hospitals, a budget maker or a policy maker cannot, do discrimination. We announce our policies and you can access it. We don't. That is an equal opportunity paradigm. But what Ashish mentioned is an equity paradigm, because equal opportunity paradigm didn't create that much of, beautiful India, what it should have been. Because if you look at the access statistics, the public expenditure benefit incidence, if you look into, you can understand that the access was uneven. Why a certain group of people are not able to access it, participate in education process, and participate in the health sector for their, care. Why there is nutrition for a certain segment of people. That's why gender budgeting is that budgetary tool which looks into these unfreedoms of the people, and they tackle these logical entry barriers so that everyone can access the market economy and everybody can come and access it. So that's the importance of gender budgeting. And that exactly should be the public policy narrative, because otherwise, if we believe that everything is based on equal opportunity, that equality may not work in the time, especially of crisis. Thank you so much for asking me that question, Ashish. And Gayatri Srikumar also mentioned about gender responsive budgeting. And I'm so happy that you are focusing on gender budgeting as a powerful policy tool. But in many countries, the security and the safety of citizens and, the women, status of women, that's happening at the top level of the government. And, can you imagine, like in Australia, we are having a status of women's office in the PMO? That much importance needs to be given to the issues related to, the gender in the sense, of course, there are issues related to men, transgender. So I'm not talking only about the women, but all these issues need to be given utmost priority. And you can see that in some Pacific islands like Timor-Leste, it is at the top level, that status of women's office, or the gender is talked at the top level. So that's the priority we need to get to, take this movement ahead and translate this public action into public policy narratives. And as Gayatri rightly mentioned, we have in India, we introduced gender budgeting long back in 2005-6. But on the contrary, we are leaning back at 140th rank of 156, the worst ranking in South Asia in the Global Gender Gap Report. Why? That what all we can implement in order to reduce the gender gap in India? It's a beautiful question. And I will tell you the positives and negatives of impact of gender budgeting happened so far. There is a study by Janet Stotsky in IMF. She looked into the impact of gender budgeting on gender outcomes, just like the way Gayatri mentioned. And Janet Stotsky's analysis showed that gender budgeting is quite powerful in reducing the disparities in gaps in the education. And there is another paper by myself, Janet, and Piyush Anthony of Oxford. We looked into the intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanisms because, money is not only related to the public expenditure happening at state and center level, but there is a fiscal transfer process, like a part of money from center government is transferred to the state governments, right? And in that, it is formula based. It's very scientific, based on population area. Climate change is also a mandate of the finance commissions. So what could be that narrative that finance commission can do to incorporate the gender so that the issues related to the gender budgeting can be tackled? These are open questions, and intergovernmental fiscal transfers incorporated one gender-aware variable to tackle the population issues. The moment they announced that they are going to use recent population than 1971 population, then you understand that debate that the states in which you control the population, you send the girls to the school. The moment you keep the population as the basis for your fund transfer, the states in which the population is controlled can suffer. But this is not a population control in that sense, but it's a kind of population control in the sense that there is an empowering process that is happening in the state because of the education, because of the empowerment of the girls, in turn led to the decline in the population. It's not like the strict policies related to population or anything. And the positivity is that intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanisms has got a positive impact on the gender outcomes. The moment you look into unconditional grants, transfers happen in terms of conditional grants and unconditional grants. Conditional grants in the sense, the states are given grants but based on certain conditions. But unconditional grants is through finance commission, you transfer your funds to the states. And right now, that is 41% of the tax pool is transferred to the states. It's unconditional in the nature. And, states have now the space to prioritize their, socio-economic objectives. And, in that sense, states have the space to prioritize gender budgeting. And the negative is that we didn't find any significant and positive link between gender budgeting and labor force participation of women in the economy. It's a feminization view. Over the years, the female labor force participation initially declined, but it can increase. That is why it's called feminization view. But that view, it's not quite strong in our country. If the fastest and smartest of development are to get your GDP correct, you get the girls and women on board in the labor force participation. What's preventing us from, girls participating in the economic activity? Such kind of process, as Ashish mentioned, unless we have policies related to the care economy infrastructure, then, women's labor force participation will not increase. So that's the, that's the space in which gender budgeting has to do a bit more. So identify that where you need to put more efforts. There are positives and there are negatives. And I do believe that gender budgeting is a powerful policy tool to get that fastest and smartest way to increase our GDP by increasing the labor force participation of women. Because employer of last resort policy, that's a major policy of our government by guaranteeing jobs. But when you look into the gender differential data, you can understand that, women didn't access the jobs, though it was promised to them. Why women are not coming out and accessing it? What is that unfreedom? That's what exactly Ashish mentioned the moment he talked about the unpaid care economy sector in which we need support. So we need to work a bit more on increasing the labor force participation of women. Thanks again to Gayatri, Srikumar, and to Ashish for those reflections. Now I'll get into 3 final questions. That is Sharika. Okay. She just mentioned that there's no particular point on that. Nanda. Thank you so much, Nanda. Recently, I came across a post by ex-finance minister. The post stated that in 1991, during the economic reforms, the rich of India held the 16% of property shares, where the country's most destitute held only 8.8%. Cut to the present, the percentage held by the rich is up to 45%, and poor went down to 2.5%. The post also mentions about taxing the top 95%, 965 wealthiest families by 2%, and how can it help in implementing welfare scheme of 5 lakh crore for the country's poorest. So my question is why? Okay, Ananda, that's exactly why I mentioned about the uneven recovery. We need to focus, and your points are welcome. That's a concern, that this uneven recovery we need to look into. But as a finance minister, a moment if I see there, your prescription is tax prescription, tax the wealth. That's a prescription you're putting forward. And in this pandemic period, we have not seen any tax-related announcements, but our narratives was more through the deficit dynamics. But in the long run, I hope that this narrative of using the tax to increase the fiscal space might happen. And due to the lack of time, I'm going ahead, Nanda. We can always have a one-to-one chat over this. And Gopi, how is the shift of the socialist economy from the government's controlled businesses of giving more power to private enterprises change the economic framework of the country? What's your opinion on it, ma'am? Gopi Chand, your concern is real because the state business relations, that is very crucial, because in my lecture, I have not focused on the deals that is happening in the economy. And, deals in the sense, as Nanda mentioned, there can be a divide like rich and poor, that uneven recovery can happen. But on the top of that, if you talk about the deals in the economy, and if the state business relations are crony capitalism or crony, then that inequality gets a new dimension. It is not only just income inequality, but that inequality is getting strengthened by the deals that is happening in the economy by favoring a certain business class through that state business relations. And I do share that concern, and it should not happen, because the inequality is not just income inequality, it is catalyzed through the state business relations. Your point is well taken. And Sharika, regarding the cryptocurrency, what's the meaning of capital itself is changing and being virtual globally. That's it. When we talk about this capital, it's not only just the immobile that capital. Now the capital that transcends into a new concept. You are correct in assuming that that the term capital itself is taking the new dimension. That's exactly the point. And Mariam Matthew, your question on MG Enriga scheme that received the budgetary allocation of 25% lower than previous year's revised estimates, correct? Is it a signal of decreasing government spending on rural development? Of course, Mariam, I share your concern. This question was asked to Expenditure Secretary in the press conference after the budget, but his intention is that he mentioned there is fiscal space for increasing the allocation for Enriga, but the question, as you rightly mentioned, then why we are not protecting it in the budget estimates? That's very important, because when it comes to the revised estimates, and another point he raised was that it is demand driven. So when there is demand, of course, the allocations will go up. But I do share your concern that we need to protect it in the budget estimates level itself, because it gets into the cycle of program of Enriga, and if the wages have to be given, it has to be given at this point of time. And we know if we wait for the wages to come, and if you're giving the wages to the people with a delay, the kind of impact that can happen on the humanitarian grounds as well as on the economic recovery, that is huge. So I think I do share your concern that though it is demand side related allocations, we need to protect it at the budget estimates level, and we have to show it up in the budget instead of curtailing it and supporting that we have fiscal space and we do increase that based as and when the demand happens. No, because it affects the entire cycle, and that's a technical issue related to fiscal marksmanship. We call it as fiscal marksmanship. Like if you are finance minister, then I will ask that the budget credibility of Mariam, you have to show it with your budget estimates and revised estimates, and that deviation has to be minimum. If your budget estimate and revised estimates, that deviation is huge, then fiscal councils, institutions like that can ask you that what happened to your fiscal forecast, why there are so many errors when it comes to the actual spending. So that fiscal marksmanship is very relevant in the sense, promising something in the budget is one thing, but looking into the hard numbers when there is an actual spending on board, that is yet another. And if there is a deviation, then the marksmanship may not be perfect. So I do support your point on protecting the allocation of government doing, that policy announcement as an employer of last resort. Because in the question between participation income and basic income, we supported participation income. That is, we have policies for the people to participate in the economy and earn an income. That is participation income. But on the other hand, basic income is you give cash into the hands of people. That is cash transfers. And there are a lot of economists like Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee, Kaushik Basu, our former chief economic advisor, Kotak Mahindra, the industrial giant. They all wanted our economy to go ahead with a kind of huge helicopter money by announcing cash to the hands of people. But for that, we need to look into the financing pattern of deficit. Where is the fiscal space for that? That's why Abhijit Banerjee and Kaushik Basu, they all argue for monetization of deficit. Like increase the support on RBI to finance your deficit, like printing money. Even though it is called printing money and financing deficit, it doesn't happen like that. It print money and give. It happens through ad hoc treasury bills. That's the way India financed fiscal deficit long back. Through the ad hoc treasury bills, you do monetization of deficit. But Government of India is in no mood to do that, monetization of deficit and increase the fiscal space. They are focusing more on the market borrowing because the hunch is they are, very cautious about that because it can lead to inflationary pressures. It can lead to fiscal profligacy. So in the past that has happened, so they are not getting into monetization of deficit. But a moment, I think a finite monetization of deficit is relevant because if our counterfactual or if our counter narrative is fiscal austerity. So if I have on one side fiscal austerity, on other side a decision I can take regarding monetization of deficit, I think I'll go for monetization of deficit rather than announcing expenditure compression and believing revenue stability is important for expenditure priorities. If you don't have revenue stability, of course expenditure compression is the only way. No. If that is the case in which we are mounting to, then of course we can go ahead with monetization of deficit. That's my sense. But right now, rate of interest of the economy is less than real rate of growth. So we are in a bit of a comfort zone, but if the real rate of interest rate is greater than the real growth of economy, then that's a matter of concern. Thanks, Mariam. And Madhavi, your question, what is your take on making no changes on the personal tax of people in the background of rising inflation, rising fuel prices, and rising unemployment? It seems that the government is banking too much on crowding in of private investment to address the issues related to common people, like unemployment, as the budget witnessed a reduction in the Enriga, in which the people immensely suffered during the pandemic. Okay, Madhavi, your question is also related to the question raised by Mariam. And I partially answered your question, but your question specific to the personal income tax, government has not touched the taxation side at all. They have neither increased nor decreased the tax front. I do believe, like you, Madhavi, that we can, we should have done a tax cut for the small business firms and poor income households. So that level, a tax cut would have, fastened that recovery process through the demand side. And even I mentioned this point to the prior budget talks, that a tax cut could have been a fastest way to trigger the economy from the demand side. But they are very cautious about touching the tax front. All what I could understand from the press conference is that Minister mentioned that I have not designed any COVID tax for you guys, that I increase the tax rates as a source of increasing the fiscal space. So that itself is an important thing. That's the way she mentioned. But, tax cut would have been a good thing. So I do take that point of yours, Madhavi. Thanks. And Nanda, you asked me again on the effective measures to bridge the economic disparity. And okay, you are. It is coming as an iterative process. It's coming from their questions. Measures to bridge that economic disparity. That's what I mentioned, that we need to focus on the learning loss. We need to focus on the social protection and social infrastructure. And, we have to focus on the malnutrition. And of course, there is only one difference in the policy narrative between the Congress and the, BJP. That is Congress, if Congress is on par, they might have gone for huge cash transfers. That's what the narrative I get when I hear to Priyanka Gandhi, when I listen to P. Chidambaram, that huge cash transfers, that basic income would have been given more importance, but BJP is giving emphasis to the participation income. So that's the clear narrative difference I could feel between two major political parties. And another thing is, what we have not done right now is we didn't do the monetization of deficit. But I think Congress, they are little open towards the monetization as a last thing. But of course, Manmohan Singh has clearly mentioned that monetization of deficit, this moment is unwarranted as long as your R is less than G. So we need to look into those parameters and, decide on that monetization. Now, Gauri Priya, okay. The question relate to the migrant workers and the job security. I'm getting my answers quick, but we can of course have a one-to-one chat later. My quick answer to you is that, of course, this focusing on the urban poor and urban unemployment is very important, because urban poverty we have not looked into, and there was some discussions related to urban Manrega, like urban rural, not rural, urban job guarantee schemes. So these are questions we need to look into to give the more emphasis on the migrant workers. But that's an important area of concern. And when we design this urban job guarantee schemes, we need to look into that migrant crisis, and that is quite uneven across India. And now, thanks, Gauri Priya. Nasif's question, RBI has taken the right decision given the global central banks hinting the faster policy tightening to fight inflation. Nasif, right now we have given importance to growth recovery process. So if you ask me with a gun on my head, I will say that it's okay for the moment. But given the mounting pressures regarding inflation and the capital flight issues I mentioned, I think we need to look into increasing interest rate in the medium term, because we are closely watching the US Fed Reserve moves. And of course, there is a tug of war between Ministry of Finance and RBI regarding the rates of interest, because Ministry of Finance want it to be, low because the cost of public debt otherwise go high. So it's a kind of a policy dilemma, because a central bank has got this public debt management, and central bank has got, this inflation containment. So in this mandate, in this dilemma, a central bank supporting the public debt management, then they have to keep it lower. That's why, Many economists argue that you need to take out that public debt management entirely from the RBI so that you can focus much more on the inflation containment. But by new monetary policy framework, that inflation expectations channel, we always maneuver to get the interest rates. But your concern, I want to link financialization of savings also to it, that Naseef, in the sense, when the interest rates are lower, right now what's happening? Your CPI inflation is mounting to 6%, and the interest rate is around, for suppose 4%. Then you are into negative real rate of interest, right? In the sense, negative real rate of interest is nominal interest rate minus inflation. And nominal interest rate is around 4% and inflation is 6%. So you are into negative real interest rate. What does it mean? In the financialization of savings, the money we put in the bank, in the term deposits, are we not even getting the money we deposited if our real interest rates are negative? That's why the people are taking the money out a bit towards mutual funds or to put little bit of stock market or the other kinds of asset. So what exactly is happening regarding financialization of savings? So taking a look into all these aspects, I do believe that RBI, though growth first is the narrative right now, in the long term, they may raise a certain basis points in the interest rate. That's exactly what's going to happen. Thanks, Naseef. And Ganga, your question on private sector capex cycle. We are on the brink of a private sector capex cycle. I do believe that, the moment if I believe in crowding in, I think it is going to crowd in private investment. We have done a lot to get private investors' confidence. But what was lacking is the support in terms of, public investment in infrastructure. Right now, we are focusing on that. And that's a prime determinant of private sector. And I hope that it will happen in the future. That, we can provide, because if you ask me what is the prime determinant of the private sector investment, that is public investment, not the rate of interest, because lowering the rate of interest has not triggered that private sector capex cycle. So monetary policy failed in a sense to get that one-to-one narrative of reducing the interest rate and increasing investment. That has not happened. That's why this budget put focus more on the public investment, because monetary policy failed to trigger the growth upturn, despite doing the heavy lifting through their policy tool, that's the interest rate. Okay, so thanks, Ganga. Jyotish, the question is, Honorable Finance Minister mentioned the disinvestment of LIC is expected soon. Do you think by frequent disinvestments in the public sector undertakings, is India moving from a mixed economy to a capitalist one? Jyotish, thanks for highlighting this. When I talk about fiscal space, one thing I missed in my lecture was how Government of India visualized to increase the fiscal space through disinvestment. Thanks for pointing me out this particular emphasis on disinvestment. I mentioned that taxes were uncertain, revenue was uncertain. On the other side, we have fiscal consolidation, that path is clear. And we cannot do an expenditure compression. And we are not in a mood to go for printing money and finance deficit or monetization of deficit. So when all these things happen, from where exactly Government of India gets money from? What could be that strategy to increase the fiscal space? When this question, how they answered, was through focusing on disinvestment. Okay, we will go ahead with asset monetization. We will go ahead with privatization for getting the fiscal proceeds. That exactly was the strategy of the government to increase the fiscal space. But as you rightly mentioned, there are a lot of issues regarding that. Disinvestment is not just for your fiscal proceeds enhancement, right? Disinvestment is a major question. It relates to the labor market repercussions. It relates to the valuation and the pricing of that sector. There are a lot of issues when you talk about disinvestment. And we have seen that the disinvestment, that fiscal marksmanship I mentioned, in the budget estimates, the disinvestment target was 1.75 lakh crore. that was the target, but 1.75 trillion. But what we realized was only we touched around 9,330 crore, that shortfall. And that was not a one-time shortfall. In the last year's budget also, if you look into 2.1 trillion or 2.1 lakh crore was our target, and that ambitious target was not met. It was, what was realized was only 32,000 crores. So this year, they were quite realistic in their disinvestment targets. If you take a look into that budget at a glance document, you can understand that disinvestment targets, the tax targets, the tax projections, they're all very realistic now. And LIC, we have to wait and see. I share your concern, but we need to wait and see what exactly will happen regarding the LIC. So far, what we have seen is only in aviation sector, the Air India. That was the only case we have seen regarding the disinvestment proceeds. So government is in a mood to do that. We have to wait and see. This DPAM secretary, like disinvestment, they call it as DPAM, that department, that secretary Tuhin. I listened to him, that Tuhin mentioned that it may not be in the budget, the narrative is quite strong otherwise, that we are in the process to, do that. And the philosophical question you asked about the capitalist, from the mixed economy to capitalist, a moment, I prevent from answering that because to me, disinvestment proceed to get the fiscal space, I don't own that argument at all. I have points of difference exactly like you regarding the disinvestment strategy, but we have taken the risk. We announced a lot of ambitious targets, but right now, I do believe that it won't be an error on the side of caution, and we need to look into how this gets evolved out. And Anjana, your question on Gidi Shakti cargo terminals in the next 3 years. It's possible for our country. Oh, great. Anjana, the national infrastructure pipeline, Gidi Shakti, all these things, we have to wait and see. And as you mentioned, there are problems related to the financing of Capex and in the national infrastructure pipeline. And that was the, thing announced last year, also in the budget, but we have to see what's a kind of financing pattern that share center, state, PPP model, the public-private, participation models, and the foreign capital. So in that diamond, we need to see how it's going to get play out. And I restrain from commenting anything more on this because I don't have any specific knowledge regarding how it's getting rolled out, but we do keep an open mind and see. There are concerns regarding the financing pattern of the national infrastructure pipeline. And the last question, again by Sarika, and government has decided to allow foreign universities to operate with no regulations. Wouldn't that adversely affect the students from underprivileged sections? And what's your take on that? Of course, I do believe that this creates a divide, and we need to support, because when we talk about the national education policy, I think Shirley ma'am is in a better position to talk about the regulatory framework and the institutional framework relate to the national education policy. And because you are in the sector and you will have much more substantial visions than me to share with your students regarding the education sector. My limited knowledge regarding this is, like, despite everything, students, poor students, they depend on, government institutions or government aided institutions for their education. So if you want that inclusion, because, we have to focus on inclusion, not from the perspective of charity or anything, but to bring diversity and the talents and visions on board. So if you divide the students based on that, you are losing out the talents and the vision of the students, and that should never happen. That exclusion should never happen. So I believe in inclusive education policy, and the concern you raised regarding this divide that can eliminate the students from the low income class, that's a matter of concern, and we need to prevent that from happening, because it is very important for our educational outcomes, the insights and the talents of the students from various segments of society. And with that perspective, I think I close the question answer session, and over to Shirley ma'am and Liji ma'am to, for your, remarks. Thanks a lot, students. It's very interactive, and thank you so much for participating. And it was just brilliant, intelligent, and very humane, your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering all our questions and sharing your views with us. And I also thank the audience for being engaging and active listeners throughout the session. Next, I'd like to invite Aditya of Third BC Economics for the concluding remarks.
Hi, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, Aditya.
Hi, good evening to all. First and foremost, before going into our concluding session and remarks, let me just take a moment to thank our guest, Dr. Lekha, for taking time out of a very busy schedule to spend time with us, discussing the ins and outs of the union budget and providing her valuable insights. As we all know, the world economy and the Indian economy specifically has been through quite a bit over the past 2 to 3 years. And this year's budget is very pivotal as our economy is in a stage of recovery, aiming to recover the losses we've suffered during the pandemic years. Our honorable guest talked to us about the various dimensions of the budget, the economic, the political, the empirical, the humanitarian, and so on. Some of the many things that were discussed in our meet were the heavy capital investment for growth and recovery, the reduced relevance of the business cycle framework in the context of emerging economies, inflation containment by the RBI, and the notion of taper tantrums. The focus of this budget shifted away from revenue expenditure, which can cause humanitarian crises. What we need right now is a demand-side boost. And with regards to that humanitarian issue, there is the problem of the digital divide, malnutrition, declining adjusted enrollment rates, and the farming sector crisis. There was also the interesting incorporation of climate change commitments in the union budget, as well as the notion of digital currency and assets. And of course, we had an amazing Q&A session where all our doubts and queries were addressed ever so patiently by Dr. Lekha. I'd like to again thank our honorable guest for sharing her valuable perspectives regarding the budget, as well as demystifying several concepts and notions. Even though there are several caveats, let's hope that the many futuristic policies mentioned in the budget do get implemented soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya. I now invite our respected Dr. Abhilashi Ramesh, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, to present the vote of thanks.
Good evening. Am I audible to all?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, respected Dr. Chakraborty, our senior faculty members, and students. First of all, I would like to say that a word of thanks would in effect diminish the quantum of input that was exchanged in the session, as it was an interpretation for all of us eager to know about the working of this budget at a time when the pandemic has struck and a post-pandemic economic recovery is being modeled by the world governments all over, and the world is actually looking at India as what steps are we taking as an emerging economy. And now I would like to extend my sincere gratitude and thanks to our principal, Dr. Jijimon K. Thomas, and Vice Principal, Dr. Cherian John, who in absentia extended their wishes and their support for this webinar. Thank you, sir. And I would also like to extend my warm gratitude and thanks to our own Dr. Shobhit Sivas ma'am, who is a student in spirit, an academician in action, and an administrator of proven ability, who has touched the life of everyone in this institute with a warm demeanor and care. And thank you, ma'am, for being there for all of us at all times. And now, Dr. Lekha Chakraborty. As we know that the budget is a more philosophical, political document at a time when the economic policy of the nation is at a critical juncture where voices from across the economic spectrum need to be heard and addressed. And Dr. Chakraborty is one of those economists who are in the philosopher economics section, who are like Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, and in that hallowed legacy of philosopher economics. And we would like to thank her immensely for having given us a detailed lecture as well as a detailed question answer session that was answered with patience. And I would like to remember the fact that she was here as a student, not as a chief guest, because the degree of enthusiasm that she has generated to the students to ask more questions, and the way she explained every facet of the budget, and we would like to thank her wholeheartedly for that. And now I would like to thank Father Dr. Gigi Thomas, a mathematician and a purveyor of spirituality and service, for being with us, and also Dr. Suju C. Thomas, HOD of Chemistry, who took part in this webinar also. And above all, now we thank Dr. Liji ma'am, the HOD, and who has been an absolute support and an absolute motivator, who made sure that the program, the webinar, is conducted, and it is a successful program. And I would also like to thank the faculty members and above all our students who were there in large numbers despite the examination schedule. And with this, I would also like to thank the Professor Dr. John for giving us the technical infrastructure. And with these words, I would like to thank each and everyone for being here and making this program a grand success. And thank you one and all.
Ashina, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you, sir. The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know and about what they imagine they can design. These are the words of Friedrich August von Hayek, and I strongly believe that the purpose of this webinar is well served. And I hope that it was as valuable and memorable to everyone among you. Again, I'd like to thank our esteemed speaker, Dr. Lekha S Chakraborty ma'am, for sharing her valuable time with us and for our department. I thank this wonderful audience, and we hope that we have been a good host equally. Once again, thanks to our Vice Principal, Shirley Stewart ma'am, the Dean of our college, Dr. Gigi Thomas sir, and our respected HOD, teachers, students, organizers, and every single member of our department. And I hope that you all had an interesting and informative evening. I'd like to conclude by the words of Indira Gandhi. The more one does, the more one attempts, the more one is capable of doing. What I have narrated so far is indeed the proof of more inclusive growth. But if you ask me, can we do better? My answer would be, we can and we should. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have an amazing week ahead.
And Ashina, you held the program together so wonderfully well. Okay, congrats.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
All
ma'am.
the best. All the best. Shirley ma'am, I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.